edition of Digital Video Synthesis Environments with Andre J. Today we are going to be playing around with some stuff in Hydra. And what I'm going to do is we're going to build up to this patch right here. And I'm going to just sort of walk y'all through every step of the way and explain what's going on and how I got here. So there's sort of just two main concepts at work here. One concept is that we've got sort of cross-modulation happening between two oscillators, and they're locked in like a feedback loop, a signal-based feedback loop, and the other concept is just the video feedback that's happening at the end of the chain here. Yeah, so without further ado, I am going to delete all of this and we'll start over with the oscillators. And feel free to ask questions at any point because I have the chat thing open over here. And it's really, really hot here and it's been making my computer kind of slow down a bit, so I might not be running at full efficiency here. Let me get rid of this stuff. This. Okay, so let's just start with some oscillators. Hello! Okay, you can see, I think I may have mentioned this before, but the render, so I erased the other two buffers that were that I was outputting to, but just erasing them doesn't really erase them in Hydra. If I want to actually erase them, I'm going to have to hit refresh on my browser over here, which is right up here because I'm running on Vivaldi. And yeah, so then we just have these two oscillators, and the two oscillators are like perfectly in sync right now. So it just looks like there's one long oscillator going on over here. And, you know, that actually might be a pretty interesting way to use this sort of render, where you render all four buffers at the same time to try to, like, set up all four buffers to be doing something that sort of, like, flows into one another, but then, like, has some changes in it. Maybe I'll think about that sometime in the future. But I'm going to set up these two oscillators here to be doing some cross-modulation between one another. But first, before I do that, I want to make sure that my oscillators are doing something kind of slightly different from one another, because if we just sort of feed them back on each other, and it's almost the same thing as if we just fed the same oscillator back on itself, which is cool, but it's not what I want to focus on today. So, the simplest way is let's just set this up 3.5 arguments here, and then let's set this argument over here at 4.3, and we render it. And so now we have two pretty slow oscillators, and they're not in sync anymore. So you can see that. Maybe it'll give us a couple more lines to work with. 9 and 10. There. So now we have some more banding going on. So yeah, we've got the two oscillators moving. Well, actually nothing's moving, really. If you think about it for a second, there is no motion happening on this screen. All of the pixels on the screen are hardware. They are fixed in place. What's happening is a rhythmic change in each one of the individual pixels that our brain is identifying as some sort of a movement because of the gestalt effect of each one of the individual pixels' modulation. So like we just pick this pixel right here, we can see it's white now it's gray, black, white, gray, black, white, gray, black, white. So just like each one of these things is just modulating. But I don't know if this has any really intense relevance to video synthesis, but it's something I think about a lot. is how we sort of perceive these wave-like motions when there isn't actually anything moving whatsoever. Sort of another interesting side note on this is that there's a theory that in human perceptual systems that the fundamental thing that we identify as sort of shapes and outlines and how we identify like structure in the world is basically these sort of like sine wave gratings, which are just basically like modulating, like, or they're not even modulating, they're just still images of like sine wave bandings, which sort of like leads you to the next idea of could there be some sort of like Fourier like synthesis, like video synthesis, where you just like all you do is take sine wave oscillators and like add them together at like different frequencies to get every single shape that there is. Probably is. I would guess that that is totally legit and also would be pretty crazy complicated to try to work out, but maybe that's a fun thing for someone to work on. Fourier video synthesis. But yeah, in the meanwhile, until somebody invents Fourier video synthesis, I'm going to talk about cross-modulation. So, as always, I am going to open up the complete list of functions because this is how I get everything done in Hydra, is this complete list of functions. And I'm going to go look at the modulators. So, these are functions for describing modulators of sources. So, I'm going to pick one of these. Let's just try modulate for now. That seems pretty simple. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up modulate 01 right here, and then let's just see what that does. So if we use 01 to modulate this one, we're not seeing a huge amount of difference here. We might need to up the frequency to, let's see, 20. So yeah, I think I went over this a little bit last time, but you can see that it's sort of modulating at modulating the looks like just like the exposition of things based upon this one. Although I don't think that's what modulate does. I think modulate does something more than that. Let's just try modulate scroll X. Huh, that didn't quite work out how I wanted it to. Modulate repeat. There we go. So modulate repeat, in this context, you can kind of use that if you were following along with some of the other ones I did, and I was talking about phase modulation and frequency modulation over in vsynth. Modulate repeat with these oscillators, you can use this as pretty similar to phase modulation. So we can see how the bright bands of this are changing the frequency of the lines over here. So if I want to do cross modulation, I'm just going to use modulate repeat over here as well, and then I'm going to use source 0 for that. And wow, that got noisy in a hurry. So something to note when you're doing this kind of stuff is that when you have really high frequencies, not even really high frequencies, you saw how low these frequencies were. When you do cross modulation, it turns into noise pretty quickly. If we slow it down a little bit, then we're seeing some more interesting stuff. And you might ask at this point, so what I'm trying to do with this is sort of get like generative oscillators happening, sort of more like free-flowing, organic, evolving shapes happening. But you might say, oh, I've played with Hydra before. If I want to have something that's like that, why don't you just use noise? And I think noise is great. Noise is a pretty awesome source. But the thing about noise is, let's just pull a noise over here. The thing about noise is that it is sort of, it kind of falls in that realm of like, it feels like generative organic movement. But in another way, it's sort of like, not stale, but it's like, it's got the same shape. So noise The mathematical definition of noise in like a signal, and these are signals we're talking about because they are changing over time. The mathematical definition of noise is that it is a fractal signal, meaning that every sort of like zoom in and zoom out, like no matter what scale you go at, it has the same like pattern. So it's a scale-free pattern. This means that noise kind of just has like, it's just sort of like has this sort of same-ish feeling no matter what. And a lot of times when you use noise, it's very recognizable. If you've ever used Perlin noise or played around with this kind of thing before, you can kind of just like see it in an instant and be like, oh, that's Perlin noise. That has to be that. Smooth noise somewhere. And I want something that is going to be a little bit more general than Perlin noise for my sort of generative things. So that's why I'm starting with just the oscillators instead of noise as a source. But I'll also experiment once we get some more crazy things going on here. I'll show you what we can do with other things other than oscillators as our sources for this cross modulation. But I'll leave noise over here just so we can sort of compare and contrast how the noise with the generative oscillator setup. So you can see that we've got these two locked in cross modulation, but they're both horizontally aligned. And I would like to see what happens when I change the alignment of one of these. So I can just do rotate 1.56 and flip this on its side. And now you see that this is sort of, we're getting a way different pattern happening over here. And we're sort of starting to see a little bit more kind of like generative things, but not quite. Because what we've got happening here is, so this has 1 in 0.3, this is 2 in 0.5. So they're definitely not like in sync, but there's still like the same basic sort of like shapes are coming in and out. I want to get some more dynamics happening here. So one of the first things I would like to do is we'll set up some modulation in the rate, or we'll set some modulation in the frequency of the oscillators. So that's this first argument right here. So I already kind of have these set up from earlier. You can see I've got osc, and then there's just a time function going into 6.0 plus 3 times math.sine times time times 0.05. So I'm just going to delete this, uncomment this. And we can see already we're starting to get some more complex stuff. It's still pretty tiley. It's still very much like an Escher woodcut or something happening here. And it's also kind of fun to notice how like these, they're not exactly inverses of one another, but they're like complementary. There's like a duality happening between these two. But we can kind of already see that there's something sort of fundamentally different happening between this screen and this screen. This is pretty tiley still, but around in these sort of like edge zones, there's like the signal feedback is starting to pick up and kick in a little bit more. And I can do the same thing with this other oscillator. So I had this set up already. And you can see that these are both kind of doing things at different rates here. So the time modulation is 5.0 plus 2 times math.sine, and then time is going at a rate scaled down like 0.03. This one's scaled down by 0.05, and it's 6.0 plus 3 times math.sine. So this is something I went into last time, and it's something I'll probably just keep going on about every single time I do one of these, is that if we have different arguments in these functions that modulate, that are sort of co-prime to one another, then we'll get more, the period of repetition will start to get so large that it doesn't even like qualify as repetition in our brains. So yeah, that's what that is all about. And you can also try doing some scaling on here too, because you can see that the modulate repeat is sort of like scaling things in and out. Another fun one we could try, well, before we've gotten anything too complicated, Instead of modulate repeat, let's just try some of those other modulate functions that they've got. So, try modulate scale. One. And same thing over here. Huh. Well, that one doesn't seem to do a whole heck of a lot. I think we're zooming in way too much to see what's going on. Maybe if we wait just a moment, we need to up the frequency. Oh yeah, we just needed to up the frequency a bit. So there we go. We can see the cross modulation signal feedback is happening over in the corners here pretty strongly. That's bad. What are the other modulators we've got? We can just try this modulate once again with both of these two together. This is also looking a lot like frequency or phase modulation. We're not getting a lot of the noisier feedback. Maybe if we upped the frequency on each of these, we would start to see some more things happening. Wow, that was too much. The fun thing about the noisy things is that it can get pretty hard to see what's going on with my cursor. There we go. This is some pretty fun, wiggly things happening. What other modulations do we have? We can do Modulate Rotate as well. Let's see how that one goes. Ah! Yeah, that one got a little extra noisy in the corners here. Yeah, we're getting some really crazy whirlpool. Yeah, you can sort of see how, like, this sort of cross-modulation, the oscillator cross-modulation has just, like, a fundamentally different feel from this sort of a thing. Whereas this is, it's chaotic, but it's not in the same sort of, like, general-purpose, scale-free, like, everything sort of doing everything in the same way. Like, the speeds and the shapes and everything are sort of like moving all over. We've got these focal points and these weird little eddies and whirlpools and vortexes all over the dang place. And let's try one more modulator. What else do we got? Modulate. Ooh, Modulate Collide. I wonder what Modulate Collide will do with all of these. I definitely haven't tried all of these. I'm a big fan of improvising things in a live setting. Okay, that got incredibly noisy very quickly. We might need to bring the frequencies down to see, like, more stuff happening here. Wow, not really much of a halfway point. Oh, here's a nice middle ground. And then something in general, when you're doing signal feedback like this, And you start to get like the really like crazy noisy patterns happening. Hydra has a function called blend, and this is just going to alpha blend the output of this with the previous draw of the previous frame of the output. So if I do blend 0 right here, this is just a real cheap and easy and simple way to sort of try to like filter things out. Blend 01 over here too. So you can use this. It doesn't work perfectly all the time because of you'll need to, if you don't know what alpha blending means, like I think it has something to do with the alpha being blended along with all of the RGBA. You can see it sort of smooth things out so much that we're barely even seeing that pattern again. You can give blend an argument like 0.25. Maybe we'll get more of the noisy stuff back. Yeah, or maybe not. We'll increase the frequency a tiny bit. Yeah. So playing around with the sort of signal-based feedback is really like, there's just these like points where like once you go over it, like it's either just going to be like totally crazy bonkers ass stuff like this, or just sort of like, I don't see anything going on. But it's really all about experimenting. But let's go back to, let's see, let's go back to the first one we were doing, Modulate Repeat. So noisy, I cannot see anything that my cursor is doing. Okie dokie. So you've got the Modulate Repeat happening. You've got some pretty distinctive tiling things going on. Sort of curious if I just scale one of these up, what will happen. 1.1. So scale does exactly what you think. That's pretty good. Try modulating the scale on this one. So I'm going to add some more modulation. I'm going to do Modulate Scale here. And I'm going to modulate the scale using an oscillator. And remember, if we just do Modulate Scale with the default oscillator, we'll get this crazy, wiggly, funky thing. But I'm going to give it sort of just like an on-off Modulate Scale. So give it 2 and then 0.4. And then we'll just get the sort of wave coming in and out. And then I'm going to modulate the scale on this one, and I'm going to modulate the rotation on this one. I'm going to do actually, we don't need to do the Modulate Rotate. We can just feed it one of these arguments here. So I'm going to copy and paste this thing over here. Hello there, robot. Thanks for joining. You might be interested in, like, I think the bots might be interested in this kind of a thing because you can do this on the browser. I wonder if that's why they joined. Shh. Got distracted by the bot. So I want to modulate the rotation, but I don't want a sine wave rotation. I just want a continuous rotation. So instead of the math.sine, I can just do time, function arrow, time. And then multiply that by like 0.1 or something, so it'll be a real slow modulation. All right. So this is looking pretty bonkers. Try doing some more blending on this one too. Smooth things out a bit. Okie dokie. So I'm pretty happy with this zone right now. I want to slow everything down again because I like to do this sort of stuff very slowly. It lets me enjoy the crazy shapes and stuff. So I'll do speed equals 0.5. Let's take it down by half. And you can see that just sort of globally slowed everything down a bit. Alright, so now you can see that there's a real drastic difference happening between this kind of stuff over here, this oscillator cross modulation, and the noise modulation over here. Where we've got sort of a way more, it's a mixture of like geometric shapes that sort of like show up and then dissolve and are just continuously morphing into one another. So this is sort of like a different sort of mix of like entropy and information, or entropy and like chaos and information. I don't know, however you want to like define those sort of things for yourself in an artistic way. Signal and noise, pattern and noise. I mean, we've got like many different kinds of noise involved, so it's like depends on your definition of noise and your definition of signal. But this is the kind of signal that I enjoy to look at. Alright, so we're at 8:25, and now this is time. So let me move on over to, we've got a pretty good thing going on with this signal-based feedback, I think. So let's go and start to work with some video feedback. So I'm going to say farewell to this noise over here. And we're going to use this O2 buffer right here to make a layer that we will then use for video feedback down in O3. And I'll explain what that means as we go. So, first off, I'm just going to set up a shape, four-sided shape, size of like 0.9. Oops. Wrong buffer. I gotta make sure to identify the buffers when I have the multiple outputs going on here. So, I've got this shape set up over here. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the output of O0 and use that to make as like to make a mask. So, mask O0. And there you can see. It doesn't seem like I really did anything like that much drastically different, but I did. When I set mask here, I made an alpha mask out of this. So that means all of these black pixels and all of the sort of grayscale pixels as they go are going to be like transparent in terms of layers. And this will be important for the next step I'm going to do, where I'm going to set up, use this mask that I made in O2, and start doing some video feedback over in O3 over here. So, I'm going to do SRC O3, and this means I'm using the output of O3 as its source. And remember what happens if we just do SRC O3 out O3? Nothing. I grab a different source in here, and then let's see if I just stop it right there. It's just going to freeze it. So this is, you know, boring video feedback where nothing's changing. If I do scale and then scale it back 0.99, then we see it all gets sucked into the middle and then just sort of like strobes out on itself for a bit. So that's just to sort of establish that we have a feedback loop over here. And then I'm going to grab the output, this SRC O2, and use that to mask over this. So, right after scale, we use the argument of the function layer, and layer O2 over O3. Alright, and can you see what's going on? Maybe I bring O3 up to the front here. So let's just take a gander at this for a bit. So we can see the difference is that it's sort of grabbing grabbing the mask that we made, where we added some alpha into the image so there would be some transparency. It's grabbing the edges of that and pulling it back, because the scale thing we did is going to make the feedback zoom into a tunnel. It's a little cloudy because the alpha mask that we made is depending on the brightness value, so it's sort of like the alpha has a curve to it. Ooh, we're getting some sort of little fractally like pixel shapes happening here too. That's pretty awesome. If I want there to be more rigid lines, I can use this threshold function, which is just thresh. Put that in there, and that'll make a lot more rigid lines. So now we can sort of see the feedback happening a lot more clearly. You can see it's sort of like trailing off in there. We'll try a couple other fun things on this. So, what if I invert? What if I spell invert right and then invert? So there's a pretty classic video feedback mode. I'm sure everybody who's played with camera feedback and mixer feedback has seen something like this before, where you invert black and white, and then use that in the feedback loop. Yeah, we are getting a little bit of the dragon spiral right in the middle. The dragon spiral is a pretty famous fractal shape that happens. And now that we've got all the buffers going and some feedback things happening, it's starting to slow down a little bit too. I'm going to have to go get some more water, and I'll be back in a second. Just enjoy the soothing fractals that pop in and out. Until then. Okay, I am back. So, before I do too much more with the feedback, I want to get some color happening in on here, because I think, well, I want to play around with color in the feedback loop, but I won't, because it's a feedback loop, I need to feed it some color if I want to do anything with color first. Like we can see what happens if we do something like, what if I try saturating when there's no color around? Saturate is a function that increases the saturation. Yeah, it's not going to do anything. We don't really have any color to start with. The saturation is 0. But over here, in the O2 block, if I want to add some color in, my favorite way to add some color is to use the oscillator with the offset. So I'll set up an oscillator here, and I'll set it up maybe 3, kind of going in a little bit faster. I'm going to use this offset of 2, and then use that to make the mask. Is that right? Oh wait, no. And then we'll diff it with the, what do you call it, shape. let's go back to the render grid. Let's add some more. Oh, let me double check my notes over here. So, here's the mask I made earlier. Let me try to build this up. So we had Osc, and then we did a little collide. And for whatever reason, I did diff 01. And then I did mult. Mult is another way of doing sort of like, you've got added and diff, which is additive and subtractive blending. Multiplication is another color blending mode, which does exactly what you think. It multiplies the RGB values by one another. So let's mult this by shape. 4.9. And, oh, do I need to remove this threshold? I gotta put the threshold somewhere else. That's what's going on. Forgot about all this, but when you use threshold, you can also desaturate the heck out of everything. So there we go. Now this is getting really crazy and wiggly. Well, we've got some color happening. That's what I wanted to see. Try a different diff in there. That's pretty cool. Slow this down a bit, and maybe let's try doing a modulation of the offset too. You know, what I say is modulate everything, and modulate, it's a little clunky in here. You like to modulate the modulators whenever I can, but definitely need to get a better handle on like setting up some functions on this to modulate the modulators probably. Let's just set this up to go. I don't really need an offset for this one. I'm pretty okay with it going up and down, maybe 3. And set this time a little bit faster. Maybe we go to 0.11. Okie dokie. And I want to do the thresh instead of thresholding the whole thing. So if I threshold the whole thing, then we'll lose saturation. But if I just thresh what I'm using for the mask, remember I need to put the source over that to do that. There we go. Now, it looks like I've got some crazy feedback going on in this patch as well. I wonder which one I'm doing. Is it the diff 02? It's probably diff 02. If I do this one, then we don't have the feedback. If I do diff 02, then we get some more feedback happening in there. Accidental feedback. Awesome. It's a little intense for me right now. Let's try to keep this. Let's try to keep this a little more stable. Alright, let's go back to our feedback zone. Is everybody out there doing okay? Are people following along at all? Do you have any questions? Do you want me to go over anything? Looks like I'm going to wrap this up at 9 o'clock pretty tight tonight, so there might be a bit more time for user questions if y'all's got any. But yeah, so you can see that we've got more color to start with, and it's doing the usual inversion thing with color, where it kind of like turns it into that sort of strobing thing and then dissolves it into gray. So let's remove inversion for now. And now we just have this really nice oozing color thing coming off of our seed, our mask right here. It's going a little more chill. trying out a couple of different color combinations here. That's pretty nice. You can see the sort of blockiness of the texture, the textures in the feedback. We're getting these like, what do you call it? Artifacting happening, like a sort of cross thing here and here, like right through the middle of the screen. And that's just sort of an artifact of how quantized the texels are. You can't just zoom in sort of pseudo-infinitely like you can with a video camera. You have to, like, everything gets quantized on the computer, and throw anything into a feedback loop, you're just going to amplify whatever sort of like qualities the signal has in and of itself. And when you have a digital signal, it's going to amplify the digital nature by doing this fun quantization. But yeah, this is a pretty awesome place to start. I really like this sort of weird color scheme, so I'm going to go with this. And I'm a pretty big fan of this whole thing to begin with. But yeah, maybe I want to do some more modulation. So, you can see the scale is set at 99 right here, but maybe I want to modulate where the scale goes. I want to have the scale sort of popping in and out. So, let me grab my favorite little sine wave oscillator over here, 1D sine wave, and set this up. And let's think about this for a second. So if I set it up just like this and I run this, let's just see what happens. It's going to be like, it's going to be too much. So it's going to zoom in sort of from -2 to 2. So first thing off, I'm feeding the scale function negative numbers, which I don't, and probably just like abses them or something, does like an absolute of them, but I don't really, it's not really doing us anything helpful to give it negative numbers, so I'm going to add math.abs, which is a function that just takes the absolute value of this, wrap that around here. So there, now we don't have any negative numbers, but we are zooming in. I don't really want to be zooming in all the way like this. I just want to have a little tiny bit of zoom in and out. Maybe we can slow this down. Nah, I'm pretty cool with this rate. Let's just change it so it's not the exact same rate as another one of these functions. So I want this to be at a different overall scale from things. So maybe I liked it where it was at like 0.99. It was pretty good. And I just want to, so an important thing to think about when you're doing this kind of a feedback, the video feedback, is that tiny, tiny changes are going to make huge, huge differences. And I'll sort of show you one of those by saying, just keep it at 0.99, and let's just change this by 0.01 times this. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to like modulate from 0.98 to 1. And that's a very, very small difference, but it's still going to have some pretty like dynamic and crazy awesome effects. Oh, wow. And if I change this to 2, that means we're going to have just a moment where it's at like 0.1, like a 1.01 scaling in. So we're going to have some zoom out, and then we're going to have some zoom in. Wow, this is so much fun. Alright, 15 minutes left. So, you can see is that it's moving the color things. It's not changing the color at all. I'm not positive if we got into doing any sort of color modulation last time, but let's give it a shot here. So, there are 2 functions for modulating color in Hydra, and I want to show you how each one of them works in a feedback settings. The first one is Shift. And let's take a quick gander over here and learn how to spell. Take a look at Shift. So shift is going to shift the R, G, B, and A values. So you can probably guess that we want to put some really, really tiny numbers in here. But just for the heck of it, let's draw some big ones. 1, 1, 1, 1. This is definitely going to strobe, so heads up. Well, that's actually pretty cool. I didn't really expect that to happen. I think it's because I'm shifting the alpha that we're getting some pretty weird things happening over here. If I turn off the alpha shift, let's see what happens. Oh no! So, yeah, that's another fun lesson is just try random numbers all the time. You know, it can't really hurt anything. And sometimes you wind up some pretty fun stuff. So this is a pretty great setting here. If I try like 0.5 here. There we go. So now you can see there's a bit more stroby things going on. Maybe 0.5. Now we've got some pretty heavy glitching going on. Not heavy glitching, but glitchier. 0.25. There we go. So if we've got these to slightly different things too, then we'll have some more like glitchy things that is happening. But if you're familiar with stuff I do, you know I like a nice hue shift here and there. So how come when I do shift, this isn't doing hue shifting? By hue shifting, I mean like moving in like the color wheel direction, where it's like red goes into orange, goes into yellow, goes into green, goes into blue, goes into indigo, goes into red, and so on. Whereas you can see colors are shifting here, which I hope they would be shifting because I wrote down shift and put some numbers in there. But they're not shifting in that sort of intuitional color space mode because we are shifting in the color space of RGBA, which is not how we think of hue. So if we want to try hue shifting, where there's like more like rainbow bullshit going on, we're going to need to do this colorama argument. So let's just see what happens if I do colorama and I execute it. There we go. It's still kind of glitchy, but it's like totally unicorn vomit glitchy. If I want some more gentle hue shifting, as always, I'm going to have to put some tiny ass numbers in here. Let's try 0, 1. There we go. So now you can see there's some like pastel rainbow shit happening on here. It's very quantized because of the scaling thing that's going on, but it's definitely more rainbowy than the last stuff. Might help if I make the colors more matte in the background. Yeah, maybe we turn this up a little bit. 5. That goes pretty bonkers pretty quickly. Maybe 0.2. And then remember what I said earlier, if we've got some strobing things going on and we want to try to smooth things out and see if there's like some other sort of patterns we can make out, we can try adding this blend. We can just blend it with itself. So let's do blend 03 before we do the layer. And then we see we get sort of more like smooth things happening in the background over here. And if I increase the amount of colorama, yeah, we don't get like exact rainbow zones with this, but that has partially to do with the scaling. I think if I turn off the scale, we might see more rainbow stuff happening. Yeah, kind of rainbowy. It's like a rotting rainbow. I do just some real simple scroll X, tiny number. Oh, too tiny. Too tiny for this screen. Wow, even that is too tiny. Did I do something wrong here? Scroll X. Huh, I wonder why this is not working. Do I need to do scroll X before? No, I don't. Scroll Y? Overload Hydra? Yeah, scroll Y should be making it move all over the dang place. It's not. Huh, I wonder what's going on. Might just be my computer sort of freezing out. I'm getting pretty distracted by this anyway. Yeah, so we can also try some other sort of fun things. Well, we got this crazy blob, psychedelic overload, Terrence McKenna, like edge of consciousness kind of thing going on. A real fun one I like to do with this, so you see how we had this sort of like global scale thing that was coming in and out? Hey, there's some rainbows. There's some rainbows happening. Ha 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 ha. There's some crazy rainbows all over the dang place. It's making the whole screen at one time sort of coming in and out. But one of the really neat things you can do in Hydra is you can use these sort of more dynamic ways to modulate the screen. Now let's go back and get some of our old friend noise and use that to modulate the scale. So let's do modulate, scale, noise, and see what happens. Probably need to put some things in there. Oh, I wonder what's going on. There we go. Just had to reload it. I think this is getting a little intense for my system. So now we're modulating the scale with noise. And we're getting these crazy dang amoebas all over the place. Remember the arguments for noise. You can give noise some arguments to make it a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit less amoeba-y for the moment. Let's say 1.8. Whoa. That's a little fast. Alright, this is pretty bonkers right now. Yeah, is anybody here at this live session? Just say hello if you are. I see Sarah's here, and someone else I've seen at a couple of these sessions before has said hello earlier, but I'm just kind of curious if the live sessions are actually something that people want to keep seeing. Hello! Or if I should just be doing these like pre-recorded and just put them up on YouTube. Because yeah, the Twitch is like, it's okay, but I kind of like, I'm pretty bad at like keeping a schedule, and it's a lot easier for me to just like do them like pre-recorded and put them up. So if there's not really any interaction back and forth, I might as well just do them like, pre-recorded. But if it's helpful to do it live, then I'll keep doing them live, I guess. I'll keep trying it through August, see if people are interested in this kind of a thing. Yeah, I'm about to wrap up over here. If there is anybody here, and if y'all's got any questions, now is a great time to do that. Otherwise, I had some other stuff on like perceptions and optical illusions that I was gonna try to work into this whole thing today, but it didn't really seem like that would have been too dense. So next time I'm gonna talk about parallax and using color modulation and go into a little bit more of that stuff I was talking to about like sine wave gratings and like perception and how to like use like the real simple oscillators in a hydra and just like the different like blending color space modes to do more like complex things that are being put together in the brain instead of putting complex things together over here. So you can see I put like a pretty absurdly complex thing together with not really that much code going on. But I personally, I come from the standpoint of like I like a nice like low rating on the algorithmic information scale where you can just do like really complicated things with just like maybe one or two lines of code and not like the usual object oriented like hidden way where like your one or two lines of code are actually like 12 pages of classes and objects, but really just like one or two like actual like operations, just like doing really complicated things. Um, and it's definitely possible to do that kind of stuff, but the really important thing about doing that is you sort of need to like understand how perception works and how things are being put together inside of brains and eyes. Because if you understand how perception works and how brains and eyes work, then you sort of have like a shortcut to doing like complicated things. Because all our perception is simply just two-dimensional, it's based off of like two-dimensional information. So if you want to, you can do pretty crazy stuff with just the two-dimensional video synthesis and convince your brain that all kinds of things are happening. Like I'm like just staring at this, I see all kinds of different like scales. That's like a multi-dimensional experience in terms of like how many different sorts of like parallax cues I'm getting to like where I am in space. And probably if I had this on like a VR helmet right now, I would be getting extremely dizzy. Although that would happen with any sort of VR helmet whatsoever, watching whatever. But yeah, I think that is about it for today. Tune in next Tuesday when I will talk about some more vSynth stuff. All right, have fun.